Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into an academic finding so crucial, it really should change how every government agency thinks about resource management. If you manage an ecosystem or maybe run a utility company, you'll want to listen up. We are diving into a paper that basically proves the greatest environmental threat isn't always the invasive species itself, but potentially the policymaker's best guess about what a private firm will do next.
That's a powerful finding. And it comes from the paper The Importance of Bioeconomic Feedback in Invasive Species Management, published back in 2005. The lead author is David Finnoff, working with Jason Shogren, Brian Leung, and David Lodge. It's pretty foundational work in what we call bioeconomics.
Right, bioeconomics. And the core mission for us today really is to figure out whether let's say, the pain of building these incredibly complex models that actually integrate the ecology and the economics in real time, is that effort really worth it? Or can you just stick to simpler methods? Like, why is it so crucial to capture these back and forth, these feedback links?
Well, because the problem itself, invasive species, it's huge. It's a major driver of global biodiversity loss and, frankly, staggering economic damages. So if you want to manage that risk cost effectively, you really can't rely on overly simplistic approaches. You need a framework that treats the biology and the economics not separately, but as a single interdependent system. Traditionally, the approach was often what's called the damage function model. Think of it like a one-way street. The ecologists, they tell you how much damage the species causes, and you, the economist, just plug that fixed number into your model. The biological side is treated as, a static parameter.
Okay, a fixed number, but that sounds
Well,
insufficient, right? Because in the real world, people adapt. If an invasive species messes with the productivity of something, say a firm using lake water, that firm adapts its behavior. Maybe they spend money on control, maybe they change how they operate. And crucially, that adaptation in turn changes the environment, right? It creates this continuous feedback loop. So if you ignore that loop, your prediction of how the invasion will actually progress and what the total damage will be, it could be completely off, radically wrong.
Exactly. Radically wrong. The paper actually highlights some earlier research on exotic lake trout in Yellowstone Lake, just to make this point. Ignoring that bioeconomic feedback, basically, ignoring how visitors or anglers might react to the trout invasion, it resulted in massively different long-term predictions for the native cutthroat trout. Depending on the scenario, the difference was like predicting a stable population of 3.4 million versus maybe 2.7 million. Or, this is the stark one, in the worst case, the difference between predicting 1 million trout versus 0. Gone. Those are huge existential differences.
Wow, 0. Those numbers are staggering. It absolutely proves the biology feedback matters hugely. But what I found fascinating was the specific policy caveat they mentioned from that Yellowstone case. Integrating the feedback didn't actually change the policy recommendations that much. If the economic actor being modeled was just the average visitor, why? Because, well, most visitors didn't actually fish, or maybe they didn't even know about the threat to the ecosystem. They didn't perceive it. So for policy, if the economic actor doesn't recognize or react to the environmental change, that feedback loop kind of fizzles out, doesn't it?
That's the key nuance, exactly. Feedback depends on recognition and then response. But Finnoff and his colleagues, they wanted a more direct test case, something maybe more commercially relevant. So they focused their big simulation on zebra mussels Dreissena polymorpha in a generic Midwest lake, likely impacting facilities like, say, power plants that draw water.
Ugh, zebra mussels. The absolute poster child for invasive species economics, right? They're currently costing U.S. industries, well over $100 million a year, mostly just on control, because they're absolute experts at clogging up water intake pipes, messing up water flow for power plants, for cities.
Absolutely, a perfect test case. And to model this, they used a framework they call the endogenous risk framework. Now, in plain English, this just means the risk isn't fixed from the outside. The risk of future damage is actually determined by the economic choices we make today.
Yeah.
So we are constantly creating and managing the future risk through our spending and our policies. It's dynamic.
Okay, endogenous risk. Got it. And they define two main players, two actors in the system. First, there's the private firm, like an electricity generator using lake water.
Right. And the firm is modeled as being, somewhat myopic. They're solving a relatively static problem, meaning they focus on the immediate bottom line, maybe quarterly results, operating on typical market discount rates,
Right.
Very present-focused. And their tools are private control, like flushing their own pipes with chlorine to kill mussels right there, and also private adaptation things like operating a pump longer or maybe burning more fuel to compensate for the reduced efficiency caused by the mussels.
Okay, so the firm is focused locally, privately. Then you have the second actor, the benevolent manager. This is the government agency, the regulator.
Exactly. The benevolent manager is modeled as being farsighted. They represent broader social preferences, they solve the dynamic problem, they care about the ecosystem 50 years from now, using a social discount rate, and their strategies are collective. Things like collective prevention, trying to reduce the probability of the initial invasion happening in the first place, and also collective control actions to reduce the overall abundance or growth rate of the mussels in the entire lake system, not just in one firm's pipes.
So you've got the short-sighted firm and the long-sighted manager with different tools. How did they actually test the feedback loops?
The core of their experiment was using stochastic dynamic programming, basically, a sophisticated simulation method. They compared a perfect baseline scenario where both the firm and the manager have complete knowledge and all these feedback loops are active and working. They compared that against scenarios where they selectively blinded one or both actors. They turned off specific feedback pathways.
Okay, the stage is set. They run this experiment on the zebra mussel system by deliberately turning off certain feedback loops. And they focused on two key relationships, right? First, the biology to firm loop. This is where the firm acts as if there's no change in the mussel population. The firm has incomplete knowledge of the biology.
Correct. They tested that for adaptation only, for control only, and for both together. And the second big one they looked at was the manager to firm loop. Here, the benevolent manager assumes the firm will not respond to changes in the biological state. So the manager has incomplete beliefs about how the private sector will behave.
Got it. Incomplete knowledge versus incomplete beliefs. And crucially, they tested the consequences under two different starting points, before any invasion versus after the invasion is already established.
That initial condition turned out to be incredibly important.
Okay, let's really unpack these results then, because you said they're highly sensitive to which actor is blinded and when. Let's start with what sounds like the least destructive scenario. Result 1. Removing that biology to firm loop, but just for adaptation actions. The firm is blind, but only regarding adaptation needs.
Right. So biologically, almost no change. The probability of invasion, the final mussel abundance, pretty much the same as the baseline. Which makes sense, right? Adaptation is about adjusting your own operations to cope, not directly killing the mussels in the lake.
Okay, so the lake looks fine, but what about the economics?
That's where it hit.
Substantial economic consequences. The firm being blind to the real mussel levels, either undershot or overshot its required adaptation effort. If they thought there were no mussels, $NT belief, when there were, they didn't adapt enough. If they thought mussels were present, $NT belief, when they weren't yet, they adapted too much. Either way, it led to massive operational inefficiency. Huge opportunity cost losses, as the paper calls them. Basically wasting money because they were guessing wrong about the environment. So significant welfare loss, even though the mussel population itself looked okay in this specific scenario.
Okay, interesting. Economic pain without immediate ecological disaster. Now, result 2. Still the firm is blinded, biology to firm loop, but this time regarding its control actions, like pipe flushing. You mentioned this caused deterioration of both systems, ecology and economics. What was the mechanism driving that?
This is where we see the classic problem of free riding emerge. It's fascinating. If the firm incorrectly assumed the invasion was already established, and then a little belief, they started controlling too much, flushing their pipes aggressively maybe. The manager sees this high level of private effort and thinks, oh great, the firm's got this handled. I don't need to spend as much public money on broader prevention or collective control in the lake. So the manager effectively free rides on the firm's presumed, but possibly unnecessary control efforts. They pull back on collective action.
And that free riding, the manager pulling back collective action, what did that lead to?
It caused the probability of invasion and the overall invader abundance to nearly double compared to the baseline where everyone knew what was going on.
Doubled. Just because the manager thought the firm was handling it? That's a huge impact from failed coordination.
Exactly. Simply removing that collective action because of a wrong assumption about private action led to a significantly worse ecological outcome. And of course, economic costs follow.
Right.
Now, if the firm assumed $NT, no invasion, when there actually was one, the opposite happened, but was also bad. The manager overcompensated, overcontrolled collectively, and underinvested in prevention, also leading to inefficient outcomes.
Okay, so blinding the firm about control has serious knock-on effects, but you said it gets really interesting with result 3. This is removing the manager to firm loops. Now it's the manager who has incomplete beliefs, specifically about the private sector's response. What happens if the manager incorrectly believes the firm will act as if the invasion is already bad, even if it isn't yet?
This is the scenario that gives you chills. If the manager incorrectly believes the firm is already acting like the invasion is severe, $NT belief, The manager essentially throws their hands up regarding prevention and collective control. They think, well, the firm's already adapting and controlling heavily. My actions won't change much, or maybe they'll just offset what the firm does.
Mhm.
So the manager completely neglects critical prevention and collective control efforts.
Okay, complete neglect based on a bad assumption. What are the consequences?
Severe. Just catastrophic, really. This neglect causes a rapid, explosive increase in invasion probabilities. The paper states they went up 648% compared to the baseline. And the invader abundance, the actual number of mussels, it soared by a terrifying 2070% compared to the baseline.
Wait, hang on. 2,070%. That's not just a modeling error. That's a complete system collapse. An environmental catastrophe driven not by the mussel directly, but purely by the policymakers' mistaken assumption about private behavior. What was the precise mechanism there? Why couldn't the firm just compensate?
That's the critical lesson. The failure of substitutability between private and collective action. The firm did react, yes. It increased its own private control, more pipe flushing, perhaps. But here's the thing. Private control, no matter how intense inside one facility's pipes, simply cannot replace the effect of broad, collective, system-wide prevention and control efforts. You can't flush your pipes hard enough to stop the initial invasion across the whole lake or to suppress the overall population growth. The manager's mistake neglecting that essential collective action based on a faulty guess about the firm's behavior allowed the system to spiral out of control incredibly quickly. Collective action, especially prevention, is often non-negotiable.
Wow. That is a stark warning about policy assumptions. Okay, so then the final twist, result 4, which you flagged as a bit counterintuitive. What happened when they removed all the feedbacks, blinded everyone, firm and manager, about everything?
Yeah, this one's interesting. When all feedbacks were removed, the negative economic and ecological consequences were actually, well, tempered is the word the paper uses. They were still bad, worse than the baseline, but significantly less bad than that single disastrous manager-to-firm feedback removal case. Result 3.
Less bad when everyone is blind. Why?
It seems to be a paradox of uncertainty, or maybe predictability. When all feedback is removed, the manager's uncertainty over specifically how the firm will react is, paradoxically, reduced. The manager knows the firm is non-responsive now because that feedback is gone too. So the manager might still make a suboptimal plan because they're also blind to the biology, but it's a plan based on a predictably non-responsive firm. Apparently, planning based on predictable inaction, even if wrong, is less damaging than planning based on a wildly incorrect guess about unpredictable private activity that leads you to abandon essential collective duties.
Okay, that makes a strange kind of sense. A known unknown is better than an unknown unknown you pretend to know. So pulling this all together, what does this mean for someone actually managing policy or economics in the real world? Is capturing feedback worth the effort?
Absolutely. The effort seems worthwhile. But the critical insight is that the type of feedback matters immensely. It's not just about more feedback is better. The most important kind of two-part lesson seems to be this. First, if it's the firm's knowledge about the ecosystem that's incomplete, like in result 1 and 2, the system is surprisingly resilient, provided the benevolent manager has a good grasp of both the real ecosystem state and the firm's actual behavior. The manager can often compensate effectively.
Okay, so manager awareness can buffer firm ignorance to some extent.
Yes. However, and this is the big one from result 3, if it's the manager's beliefs over the firm's behavior that are incomplete or just plain wrong, the consequences of ignoring that specific manager-to-firm feedback can be absolutely severe, catastrophic even, as we saw with that 2,000% spike. It really highlights that the manager's policy choices, which are fundamentally based on assumptions about how firms and individuals will or won't act, carry perhaps the greatest systemic risk.
It's a powerful validation that policy, especially environmental policy, simply cannot be made in an economic vacuum. You have to understand the human response. The major limitation here, though, is obviously that the model focuses very specifically on zebra mussels and one industry type, electricity generation.
Exactly. That's a key point the authors acknowledge. Future research, they suggest, really needs to explore the robustness of these findings. Would these same mechanisms, the free riding, the catastrophic failure from wrong policy assumptions, hold true for different invasive species, say agricultural pests or forest diseases, or in entirely different environmental or regulatory contexts? We need more case studies to see how universal these feedback dynamics are.
Absolutely. So for you, the listener, grappling with complex systems, the key takeaway from this deep dive seems crystal clear. In these intricate bioeconomic systems, the biggest operational risk might not always be the invading organism itself. It could very well be the policymakers' incomplete or incorrect belief about how private agents, firms, landowners, individuals are going to respond to that invasion. Policy is incredibly sensitive to those assumptions about human behavior.
Which leaves us with a final, quite provocative thought for you to consider, building on that finding. Knowing that a well-intentioned manager's incorrect assumptions about firm behavior can inadvertently lead to, say, a 2,000% increase in environmental damage. How can we design our institutions? How can we improve information sharing, maybe transparency requirements? How do we ensure policymakers have the most accurate, potentially real-time understanding of what private firms are actually doing for control and adaptation? Is better information, in the end, worth more than barrels of chlorine? Something to think about.